Hi, and welcome to Slot Leader, a Cardano finance podcast that bridges the gap between the traditional finance world and the world of blockchain. I'm your host, Umed Saidov, and in this episode, we have a special guest from the Cardano Foundation. His name is Frederik Gregaard, and he is a newly appointed CEO of the foundation. In the in depth interview segment of this podcast, we go over some very foundational questions about the work of the foundation and his vision about how he sees the foundation to function in the future. And also, we ask some tough questions that we can't do without those. And this interview has a lot of interesting insights, and I hope you guys enjoy watching the interview and let us know what you think. Before we start our episode, I would like to remind our viewers and listeners that Slot Leader is an educational podcast, and as such, we do not provide investment, financial, tax, or legal advice, even though we might have experts on our show that might be experts in those fields. Nothing they say here should be construed as legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. As always, I would like to thank our viewers and listeners for their support. If you like the content that we're putting together and have been watching our videos for a while, please do not forget to subscribe or comment or like our videos. It helps a lot in terms of getting the word out. If you are a Cardano stakeholder, you could support our channel by directly delegating your stake to Sky or Sky2. These are our tickers for the Skylight pool. This week, two pieces of news caught my attention when it comes to blockchain industry. The first one involves Bitcoin. It looks like the US government, according to multiple sources on the internet, has the custody of $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. Now, without knowing all the other details, we know that this increases the available supply for Bitcoin, which could, in the worst case scenario, have negative effect on the price. But I don't know exactly what the government will do in this case with Bitcoin, whether they're going to sell it or whether they're going to hold it. Most likely they're going to hold it until the investigation is complete. I think this batch of Bitcoin is tied to Silk Road. So as long as the investigation is ongoing, probably we won't see any of that Bitcoin coming on the market. But the fact that they are available should be taken into consideration by the serious investors who are in this space. I would like to know if any of you have any insights on how the government functions when it comes to digital currencies and their custody and what they can or cannot do. It will be interesting to have a more in-depth discussion around that, because I think that's a significant chunk of Bitcoin there. And not only Bitcoin itself, but other currencies are affected by that, because algorithms seem to work in tandem in order to adjust the prices of all the alternative coins. The second piece of news that is interesting is coming from the BCG, which is the Boston Consulting Group. It's one of the most prominent consulting companies, which means that whatever they write is something that will be seen and taken into consideration by a lot of prominent businesses. So what do they write about? In their article, they're talking about how banks can succeed with cryptocurrency. And let me read you the first sentence in that article, which is quite a big surprise for me. So the article, basically the first sentence says, be prepared for a major transition in banking industry, in banking during the early 2020s. It's time to adopt cryptocurrencies. Now, the article itself basically lays out the pathway for traditional banks to be able to survive in an increasingly digitized world where value might be transitioning from the traditional financial world into the world of cryptocurrency, and gives them, the banks, a few recipes on how to reorganize themselves and be successful. So I will include the link down below in the comment section of this video, so you could read. But it's a fascinating article that lays out the future as inevitable, and it's a great sort of piece of guidance for traditional banks to follow. If you're part of the Cardano community, this week has been quite significant too. IOG has released a blog post where they detail how they are going to move the K parameter. Now, K parameter is a parameter that regulates the size or the optimal size of your pool. Now, currently it's set at 150, which translates roughly to 210 million ADA being the ideal size for a Cardano pool. And the way the system regulates itself is that if your pool grows beyond that size, the rewards for the delegators or the stakeholders get slashed. So if you're, let's say, getting 6%, you will be getting 5%. And if the higher, the further away you go from that point, 210 at this point, the higher the amount of penalty, so to say. Now, when the K parameter moves from 150 to 500 later this year, which is very close, December 6th, this ideal size of the pool, instead of being 210, becomes 64 million. So if you are in a pool that has more than 64 million ADA, you will experience significant reduction in rewards. You will not lose your ADA. It's just that your rewards will be much less if you are in a pool that is very much oversaturated. Let's say that you are in a pool that has 120 million ADA, you are going to be receiving much less in rewards. So now we have been given some time by IOG in order to move the stake. So if you are a stakeholder, please find a pool of your choice that you would like to delegate to and move your stake now. When it comes to markets, this last week was all about Bitcoin, to be honest. And in this chart that I have in front of you, the red line is Bitcoin prices, and the candles represent ADA versus USD. Now you can see that in the beginning we saw the rapid rise of Bitcoin price, which was not followed by the rise of alternative coins, and once the price more or less stabilized on November 6th, we saw the uptick in the price of ADA, and it went all the way to if I remember 11.3, 11.228. And then we saw a decline in altcoins, and you always see the decline in altcoins to be more rapid, or the growth is going to be more pronounced when these swings happen. That's called beta. And yeah, and at this point we are kind of stabilizing around the values of say 10.5 cents per ADA at this point, and 15.3 the latest reading for Bitcoin. Now in the longer run, if you look at year to day, we see that ADA has outperformed pretty well the Bitcoin, and this is quite significant. You can see that the range is twice. If you are invested in ADA, your returns are twice as much as Bitcoin. That again doesn't say anything else about where things will go, but looking at historicals, you can see that the major part of outperformance started sometimes in April, and it kind of peaked in July, and it came down to a bottom. It bottomed out on September 24th, and it's been kind of going up in a steady pace. So this is the market update for this week. We will see what happens next week. I think the markets overall are taking a little bit of a breather after rallying, especially Bitcoin. It's been quite a significant rally in the past week. So we'll see what happens. I think in the long run, things are looking pretty good. We will see what happens next. As an open blockchain protocol, Cardano relies on the work of 3 different entities. And these entities are IOG, which is responsible for the design and engineering of the protocol. We have Emurgo, which is an entity responsible for the commercial applications of the protocol. And last but not least, we have Cardano Foundation, which is the standard setting body and the legal custodian of the blockchain. In today's in-depth interview, we have Frederik Gregaard, who is the CEO of the Cardano Foundation, and he's going to share with us his vision about how this protocol is going to evolve in the future and the contribution of the Cardano Foundation in that work. Now, before we go into this interview, I would like to tell our viewers and listeners that this interview is conducted by me as the host of Slot Leader and not as an operator of the Skylight Pool. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome to our program Frederik Gregaard, who is the newly appointed CEO of Cardano Foundation. Frederik, welcome to Slot Leader.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Frederik, if you could tell us a little bit about your background to our viewers who may not know you.
Sure, I'm very happy to do so. So I'm probably what they call a technology banker. And what could be a little bit interesting and nobody knows, or few people know about me, is that I did some really big mistakes in my career because I was a really bad trader. I got very emotional, right? And I was also selling a lot of, let's say, financial and structured products to people because I had this vision around democratization. I wanted to democratize all these products. I could not understand why you cannot just walk into any bank and get exposure into oil. I mean, come on, how difficult could that be? Now the world has moved along a little bit, but what I discovered on that journey was the way we do banking today, right, is not really the way I would like it to be done. I think banking is much wider and much bigger than what we let it to be. And a lot of this is about financial illiteracy. It's about people understanding the financial products, understanding the landscape and what it does and what it enables us to do in the fabric of society. So I very quickly, became an infrastructure banker, you can say. So I was building infrastructure. And that kind of led me on a journey towards what is the perfect infrastructure. And I always was this rational guy, I was like, if it can be done better, cheaper, you get more clients, you get a better P&L, you get a better tier 1 ratio, you have more shareholder value, why wouldn't you do it? Right? And I was, preaching and coming out with all these great things. And I did not really feel the adoption as I wanted to have. And then it took me a bit of an eye-opening moment. I was simply too rational. I think we are not just rational people, not even the bankers. We also have an emotional and a political side. And only when I started to address that and learning about how to address that and design for trust in that equation, I got, some traction around that.
Yes, it's amazing that you mentioned that because I've kind of went through the same kind of thought process when I was in the banking. There's a lot of inefficiencies in this current banking system that could be easily alleviated by the use of technology. But it's not done because of maybe you could call it a historical inertia. People are slow to change. This is something that they've done for a long time themselves. But anyway, story short, it's great to have you here, and I'm glad that there is somebody else from the banking and finance industry who's joining the ecosystem, because ultimately, for a financial operating system to realize its potential, we need bridges to gap that knowledge gap, to bridge that knowledge gap. So if you are, you're coming from the financial industry, you've got an extensive, interesting career in the financial industry. Why did you join Cardano Foundation, and why now?
That's a very long question, huh? So I think I could answer that in multiple ways, but I think what's probably mostly interesting about it is that I got a bit of an epiphany, because my life has been very much around the last 4 or 5 years, because I went to PwC because PwC is 260,000 people. It is basically a specialized institution in bringing trust into balance sheets and solving important problems in society. So I thought, hey, if I could go in there and I can mobilize 260,000 people who do this for a living, who is so professional and so deep into the topic and learn everything about audit and risk assurance and tax and legal and compliance, I could test all these hypotheses I had about how to build more trust in banking capital markets. So that's why I joined PwC. And then I got this epiphany, right? Instead of trying to move this big tanker, right? Maybe there would be a way I could directly get my hands dirty and get back into the engine room, get back into where things are being built and where things are being deployed and tested and brought out to real life, right? And Cardano was on my list of, when I went to PwC, I had a list of 20 projects, accounts, call it whatever you want, where I wanted to get my hands dirty with. And I worked a bit with Cardano in PwC, and I saw that the vision about an economic operating system, social good, economic identity, and governance as a service was very much aligned with bringing trust back into capital markets and banking plus, right? So when the opportunity came, I thought now it's time to take a stand. And that was accelerated also by what COVID-19 actually has done to our society and what it's doing to business models out there. I think it brought us maybe 5 to 10 years digital adoption. So I thought, okay, this is the right time now to join one of those projects. And I really like Charles's academic approach around that. And I really like the long-term vision that is longer than a balance sheet, is longer than one generation. It's thought about that we're not just optimizing for, that the cryptocurrency goes up right now.
Yeah,
we're trying to make an influence over time.
That's fascinating, and it's something that sets Cardano apart, which I like too. But going to the second question, I know we are pressed for time. I would like to basically get your view on your mandate. Can you tell us what your mandate is within the Cardano Foundation as a CEO?
Within the Cardano Foundation?
Yeah. So you joined as a CEO. What's your mandate? Can you explain what you're going to be working on?
Yeah, sure. So I look at it from two different sides, right? So first of all, it is to bring clarity and execution power into the Cardano Foundation. So the Cardano Foundation has been on a tremendous journey in the last 2 years, where it's really got really professional. It onboarded a fantastic team. It went through different leadership styles, and also it was trying to find its own place in this value web and ecosystem, which is constantly changing, right? And what I bring in is a lot of experience around enterprise adoption. It's about banking and financial services, which is one of the, let's say, not low-hanging, but more easier use cases because it's so digital native in the way it's built, right? So it's very much around that. It's established execution power and established a vision and a purpose for the Cardano Foundation in what I call phase 1 and phase 2. In phase 1 is very much around deployment, decentralization, governance, augmentation, and onboarding of all of these amazing communities who's going to come as the technologies gets deployed. So think about what's going to happen when Gauguin comes, right? Or when the Malawi comes, really. We have the playground right now. I've shown that to a couple of CEOs and investment bankers, and they're stunned that you can do that without being able to code, that you can put, financial contracts together and deploy them on an operating system without needing a code review or without needing a testing phase and so on. So this representation of value, of identity, and of governance, I think this is some of the things I'm really going to have a focus on.
Okay.
And then
so
in
that,
phase,
yeah.
In phase 2 is very much around IOG has then deployed this amazing infrastructure, right? And who is going to take care of this community as it grows and as deployment comes and people are building on it as it is a community project. And here a big role is to find out how do we support that and how do we make it secure. And when I say secure, it is when people are building critical or life critical infrastructure on this, they need documentation, right? They need audit reports, they need all sorts of very boring topics that they understand that there's longevity into this and you can trust that chain, not just the trust equation of what the technology does, but also that it stays there for a long enough time for their deployment cycles.
That brings me to my next question. Thank you, by the way, which is the top strategic priorities. You've seen some. You've probably been onboarded to the Cardano Foundation. You've had probably a chance to review the organization. So standing right now in front of me today, what do you think you're going to be focusing on within the next 6 to 12 months as a CEO? What are the strategic priorities for you?
Yeah, as you framed it right now, I would say people, people, people. So the first people is to ensure that the team has everything they need to get execution power. So the right vision, the right tools, the right capital, that we are set forward to actually go towards our vision. The second people is to ensure that in the trinity we operate right now between IOG and between Imurgo, but also between other people who's already now deploying technology on this beautiful stack, right? That we understand what they do and we understand what's driving them, what business model and what needs do they have. And the third is around the people we don't know yet, right? So there's a lot of people in these enterprises and governments and so forth. And they're in the end going to take decisions on what kind of infrastructure they're going to build on in the future and what they're going to use in the future and what they're going to be dependent on in the future. And we need to get much deeper understanding about what is important for them and how do they tick. Now I'm coming in with a lot of experience around that already, but we need to be able to scale that and also structure that and ensure that that fits together with the technology deployment. So as the technology is being deployed and at a certain time is being taken over by community, right? We are going to be a part of the community, but we're also going to be, sort of the, I'm struggling for the word here, right? But we need to help the community to explore and see the art of the possible, right? So what is actually possible to do on this and how secure is that and how stable is this, right? And that's very much around layer 1 and layer 2 architecture around the blockchain.
Perfect. I want to change the topic here a little bit and go into the question of governance. I know that in the last few months, this has been a topic of discussion in the Cardano community. So the first question is, apart from the Swiss authorities, who is the foundation accountable to? Does it have legal and fiduciary duty to the Cardano community?
So I'm a banker, right? And I have a lot of legal experience. So the direct answer is no, we don't. From a legal perspective, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have it. It just means that from a very legal and very practical perspective, we don't have any fiduciary responsibility towards the Cardano community, whatever you describe as the Cardano community. I guess what you're talking about is the ADA holders. Could that be?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's
because for me, it's a bigger, right? So the Cardano community is a lot bigger than the ADA holders, right? Because when we start then also saying, what about the exchanges who's offering ADA today? Do we have some kind of liabilities or responsibilities towards them? What about people we signed an LOI with? What about people we entered a partnership with? And then it gets a little bit more murky, right? But I guess your question was really coming around the ADA holders. And then, no, we actually don't have any legal and fiduciary responsibilities as far as I see it. Now, there might be some country out there with a local legislation who could prove a different case. But based on the let's say what I've seen right now and what I can judge from the countries I normally operate within, no, we don't.
I see. I mean, the reason why I'm asking this is that, there might be some sort of a, concern in the community, for instance, that, if there is a case where, the foundation deviates from what the community wants, what kind of recourse do we have? And I don't think this is the problem at all right now. The Cardano Foundation has been fantastic in listening to the Cardano community, and we came up with this community-led roadmap, which is the next question I wanted to ask. Have you looked at it? Have you? Are you thinking about taking anything from it in order to implement the strategy that you see of fit for Cardano Foundation?
Yeah. So that was a long question again. So let me
Sorry.
go back. So just, I want to cut it over in two things.
Yeah.
So first of all, just because we legally don't have a fiduciary responsibility towards the ADA holders doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen. It doesn't mean that we are not actually aligned in the interest, because there's a lot of things we are aligned in, such as the vision, the end goal, the target state. Now, we might have some misalignment around how we get there. But bear in mind that, you know, we are actually on the ADA standard, right? So when the voucher sale originally was done, right, we were allocated some cryptocurrency, right? And that is what we base the whole foundation of the foundation on, right? So all financials is really around that. So we are very aligned actually on, we can only continue operate and take care of the Cardano community-led project for the generations to come if we are financially viable to do so, right? So therefore, we are very aligned actually with all ADA holders. The question is very much around the time frame, where some ADA holders might want to have the ADA to spike right now. And I'm more of a guy, I want this to have full adoption. So I'm more looking on a very long time horizon on that. So I think not just visionary, but we are also financially aligned, and we are aligned much closer than people actually think about. On the recourse question, you know, I'm really hoping that we can re-listen and so on, but legally, no, there is, as far as I can judge, not a lot of recourse. But that doesn't mean that there is not an emotional and a mental recourse around that, because we are part of the same project and the same community.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the reason why we kind of created the roadmap was, I guess it was coming from the frustration that nothing was getting done, or we did not have the visibility. I think that would be the best way to describe it, that we didn't have visibility into the inner workings of Cardano Foundation, and we didn't know what's happening and what the guys are doing, which is why this roadmap was created as a way to just sort of signal what the community was expecting.
So let me answer the question around the roadmap, because that's the second part of your question, right?
Yeah.
So as you can see, I'm a part of the Telegram group. I don't know if you noticed that. I've not been very active. I've more been an observer, also because it was just around, you know, it was created just before I onboarded, right? And then in the onboarding process and so on. So I look about it a little bit like this. So currently, it is not clear for the community who does what and why.
Yep.
And here we need to be much stronger in communicating that. We also need to be much stronger in communicating what can we actually do? What can we actually change? Where can we deploy, and what can we deploy of resources? And when I speak about resources, we have around 30 employees, right? But we also have the forum, which gives us access to much more, right? And we have a little bit of money in our treasury, right? But the majority of the financials is lying in the decentralized treasury, which is, you know, a community-led. And in the future, when the voting really kicks in, that's where the future of the development is going to come from as such, right? So I think that's, you know, so yes, just very shortly, I've looked at the roadmap, and I think there's a lot of great ideas in there. But I think some of those ideas is really nothing we can do or influence as the foundation, because right now that's very much with IOD. Huh? They're in control of the roadmap, and they're in control of the deployment. We know how it's going to end. The end result, we know how it's going to be, right? So we as a foundation, we need to be better at saying, you know, what is our sweet spot? Where can we augment and help IoT in the first phase to deploy, and by that also the community. So we need more use cases, and we need to go a little bit away from maybe pushing products to push value and impact. We need to show what's actually possible. And I think that's where we are coming in as the foundation in the future, to have, we need to do more of that, huh? Not that we are going to be like a glorified Salesforce or something like that, like, we would see from some centralized projects, right? But it's definitely, in our hands to really think about what can we do to bring long-term adoption, because the technology stack is owned by IoT and partly the community and the feedback from the community, but we own other parts, right? And what are those parts?
All right, great. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to do the rapid fire questions to at you and see how fast we can go through them, because I have a little bit of questions left here. So in terms of the foundation and the way it sustains itself economically right now, what kind of resources it's using in order to sustain itself? You have 30 a staff of 30 people, and then you might have hiring sort of plans. How does the foundation sustain itself economically? Very shortly.
Yeah, very shortly. So we got money one time, one off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we are, as you know, if you're following the protocol, right, we are staking, right? So we are earning some money on staking, and that's it.
Okay.
Right? So we don't have any other income sources, but in the future we need to start looking at other income sources as well, right? But that's a little bit hard also being a non-profit organization. But if we want to, let's say, hang around for the next 100 years to be the guardians of the blueprint of and the documentation around the protocol and maybe the magnets of the network, how do we do that, right?
Okay.
And
so you won't get into you won't sell the principal. You will only sustain yourself through the income that you will receive from the staking, and plus maybe some other donations that might come in.
We will have to sell some of the principal.
Oh, you do? Okay.
There's no way around that. So because our whole world is around the initial funding.
Okay.
And as we are not getting any other funding, neither from the community nor from other sources, right? And you should be, as a financial guy, you should have a look at the K factor and how that moves. And we are not operating a staking pool either, right? So you would see also what kind of returns you can get out of staking in the future. There's no way we can, we cannot live the vision we have without having to sell some of the principal.
Okay,
but
great.
We're going to try not to do that as fast as possible, right? We're going to try and...
Yeah, so that brings me to another question. It's like, when the money runs out, what do you guys do? And how fast do you think it's going to run out? But, that's maybe the conversation for another topic, a topic for another time. In terms of the financial reports, do you plan to release them so we could see how the foundation is spending its money? And will we be able to track its KPIs?
So the first one I haven't thought a lot about. We are an audited entity as such, right? I would need to understand why people would like to see how we do our spendings, because they should track our value. So I would probably rather go to the KPI question and say, yes.
Okay.
I really think that there should be KPIs, and we should be the first ones to put those KPIs up on ourselves and get feedback from the community. And those KPIs would probably represent sometimes a little bit more boring things than what people like right now, because the early adopters is very much around, if I use technology, is very much front-end driven, right? Yeah. And I think we should be much more focused on back-end, because if we really want this to grow and be a 1 billion people blockchain, we are an infrastructure provider. We are not a front-end provider. Huh? So, and some of that is very back-end heavy, and it's around operations, is around layer 1 and layer 2 infrastructure. So I think it's also probably good that we have some independence around how we spend the money, but it has to be done aligned with the greater vision of the project.
Yeah,
right?
The thing is that we see this greater vision, right? And we see the greater good and strategic priorities, right? And what probably some of the members of the community would like to see is whether the spending matches those strategic priorities, which are set by you anyway. It's just that when it deviates, then we might have a problem, right?
Sure.
So it's just a way to constantly keep you guys on the toe, if I might say that. But that is not to say that we don't trust you and everything. It's just in the interest of transparency, maybe it would be good. But
think about this. Think about this differently, right? Yeah. You're coming from the financial services, so you will understand that straight away, right? Yeah. If I would say that 90% plus of our financials and our capital is all in ADA.
Mm-hmm.
Then actually you don't need to see where I'm doing my spendings, right? Because if I don't create value creation on the ADA going forward, I would probably be the worst leader ever, right? Because then I would be growing up a team who is spending more and more money, but ADA is just going to go one way, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I would say that the question from you is probably wrongly formulated, right? What you want to do is you want to have some checks and balances, that we get the right traction in the project, and we ensure that the people who's engaged in the project, wherever they are, if they're Murgo, IOG, or if they're the Cardano Foundation, or if there are service providers or people where we've done an RFP to, you want to ensure that there let's say some dashboards or some open discussions around the quality of what people deliver and as they deliver what they promised, and if we are walking in the right direction.
Okay.
And what I think we have to respect is that we will never please everybody.
Of course.
And that's the beauty of Voltaire, right? So when Voltaire comes, right, it's going to be a totally new era of the project, right? Because then the community will have the lead to vote on what direction they're going to go in. And now then the community also sometimes probably will vote on something which doesn't make sense, and they need to be accountable for that. But until we get to that we get to that stage, right, we need to, people need to understand we are actually super aligned on the end state, but we could also be looking at different ways of getting there.
Okay.
And that's where I think the roadmap from the community is so important, because the roadmap actually in a very structured way gives the view of the 7,000, or maybe not all 7,000 participated in it, right? But it gives the view of a portion of the community, what they think is important. And I know both IOG, Imurgo, and us, we have had really deep looks into that, and we are really, trying to adopt everything we can from there. But the first thing must be, we need to bring not a finished product out there, but we need to have Gauguin, Basha, and Voltaire out there as fast as possible, because the whole world is looking at finding out better ways to take better decisions around governance, economic identity, and GDP growth, and bringing us together as a human race. And I think that's where our focus should be.
Yes.
But we have to be a better job in the Cardano Foundation, maybe also to show what we are doing. And we've been probably, from my outside in look, a little bit too passive around that. And I will try my best to change that. And therefore your feedback is super valuable.
Perfect. Now, with the final question, with the fresh pair of eyes, who's somebody who's just coming into the Cardano's ecosystem, where do you see Cardano's biggest opportunity for adoption and its biggest risks?
The biggest risk for the Cardano, well, there's the two biggest risks I'm really worried about for the Cardano ecosystem and the Cardano protocol is the following. The first one is people, is culture, is the legacy infrastructure and the legacy processes of how we built our society. There's a huge gap between how we've done that and how we accept that and how the world actually works today and is going to work in the future. And I'm worried that we are not able to convince and address that very emotional and political aspect with the people who takes those changes for let's say implementation and deployment for the larger business cases. So that's something I'm really worried about. The second part I'm really worried about is I sometimes have a little bit of a feeling of there's a difference in the time scale. So I think everybody operates on a different time scale. And the idea about founding a foundation was that we should fight the long battle. And then there is some other people who's fighting the short battle, right? So we all have different capabilities, but we also operate on different time frames. And I think that's something I'm really worried about. And that also kind of implies into, who does what and why.
Okay.
Then in terms of the biggest adoption cases, I think, as I said before, everything was natively digital and has complexity and a need for proper governance, both in a regulatory compliance and a human aspect into it, is things we should focus on straight away. And the other part is, I think there's a big chunk of the world who has been, I wouldn't say mistreated, right? They've just been left alone to kind of deal with themselves. And they're very ripe for somebody like us coming in, right? Because, somebody call it underbanked or underserviced or under-institutionalized, right? But I see a lot of developing countries who's moving extremely fast and basically jumping or leapfrogging over some of the steps we took in the developed world in terms of our technology steps. So, so I think there we should definitely also be there as fast as possible. And I know there's, a good handful of African countries who's ready to, as soon as we are ready from a technology perspective, to really start implementing digital currencies on the Cardano protocol. And personally, I don't see any reason why we should not also do that in Europe and the developed countries.
Now, you touched upon a very interesting issue here about developing countries. Now, there are financial institutions like the World Bank. I used to work there, the EBRD, and they all focus on bringing these countries out of poverty, and at least the intention is there. Do you see any synergies between the Cardano's ecosystem and Cardano's mission? I see them. And how do you plan to engage these communities, these banks, to adopt our technology? Because the way I see it, and I've been a vocal proponent of this, is that if you do one pilot case that is successful in one country that fits the framework of these banks, you can copy paste it and have an immediate adoption over 170 countries potentially. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yes. I mean, it's really a no-brainer, right? But if we go one step deeper, right? I don't know if you know, but I've been part of some of the national bank and CBDC projects, and I've also been part of creating some of the first regulated banks and implementing digital assets in the first regulated things, right? People underestimate what is needed for the regulator to have trust. People underestimate what is needed for those global organizations who might not be as regulated as a central bank might be or a normal bank is. What is actually needed? I mean, if they do a mistake, they're gone. Huh? They cannot take the chances. And we still have a good way to go with the Cardano projects before we are ready to kind of grasp around those projects. We are not ready now as a project. Now, yes, we can do maybe small parts, and there's some low-hanging fruits. You're going to get multi-asset and native token support very soon, right? Which will allow us to do some DeFi things, which could mean that we can take a little bit of the chunk. You will see there's coming out a couple of track and trace projects out because we now have metadata on chain, right? So I think we are getting there, but we have to be mindful of saying, there is certain things which is needed. And it's not just the technology, which I just mentioned now, it's also documentation, it's the SOC 2 reports, there's a lot of underlying checks who has to be done. And when we can check those things off, then it's just the humans. And the humans is what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about checking those things off. We will get there.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that in my discussions also pops up, the governance. How can they trust governance in these decentralized organizations, and what kind of information is out there for them to get comfortable with, with the new concepts and new blockchain technologies that could solve their problems?
And the answer to that is none, right? So right now there is no comfort around the decentralized governance out there, right? So it's very hard for an institutional player or government to understand if they run a critical piece of their infrastructure on one of these projects, what can change it? So when does a hard fork come, and what would the implications be, right?
And what kind of guarantees they have, right?
Voila, right. And can they? And that's why a lot of these people are actually not looking at the decentralized scape. They're looking at the centralized and the permission landscape, because there you can answer those questions, right? And I think that's what's so interesting with the Cardano project, right? Because we have the ability not just to do a side chain, which a lot of projects have, right? But we always look at the interoperability, right? So you can always bring it back to the main decentralized protocol, right? So this part that we're really going so far also from an academic perspective to ensure this interoperability, I think that is going to ensure that we are going to win these interesting projects of the future. But the matter of the fact is that the governance part and the documentation and the influence, what people will have, the security that people don't change something in an infrastructure layer, which they were not aware of, that's just not out there right now, how I look at the decentralized protocols. And I think people don't speak about that. And that's a shame. And that's one of the things which sounds boring, but we have to, as the foundation, we have to be front running here. We have to be the spearhead who goes out and takes those battles. And we're going to get a couple on the head from time to time, right? Because when we lean out of the window, there will be people in the community saying, why are you even wasting time on that? But that is the only way we can go away from POCs and go into full deployments. Absolutely. But I totally agree with your perception. This will be ripe, and this is the right way for players like you worked with before to go forward. They need this in the trust equation.
This was episode number 8 of Slot Leader. I'm your host, Umed Saidov, and I'll see you next time.